Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description. Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. We're recording this episode on Friday morning ahead of United's trip to Craven Cottage in the Premier League. I'm joined by Samuel Luckhurst. We're just going to go through the latest news, bit of transfer stuff, and then we'll look ahead to the game against Fulham after that. Samuel, to begin with, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Very well, thank you.
It's a new. Well, I was going to say it's a new shirt, but you've just told me that it's not a new shirt framed in your background, is it?
No. You're very nosy as always, but nothing really changes there, I suppose.
Just taking an interest in your life, Samuel. That's all that is. 10 days left of the transfer window. The bomb squad predominantly are still here. Marcus Rashford is the only one to have sealed an exit to Barcelona. Is it a huge surprise, Samuel, considering the players who have been left? Gittens, Sancho, Alejandro Garnacho, Anthony, and anyone who's forgotten, Tyrone Marshall.
You could add Rasmus Højlund to that as well and make a five-a-side team. Given the way
come on to Højlund in a moment,
It has got to the point almost where it feels like as though he might as well turn up at a different time to the core squad. But it really isn't a surprise because it's such common knowledge that United want rid of these players, as you just outlined with them. 3 of them were on loan, either for the entirety of last season or half of last season. The half that they were there, I mean, Anthony started a couple or a few cup games, wasn't it? Tyrone Marshall started, I think, 5 games and he was substituted at half-time in 4 of them. Jadon Sancho hasn't played a properly competitive game for United in 2 years and is just someone I think people can't wait to get rid of permanently, but he's a player who is such a tough sell that Chelsea paid money not to sign him, haven't had him on loan. And Garnacho, I think Chelsea are always going to chance their arm there. They've got a free run at him where other clubs have had a look at him and thought, he's not for us. Chelsea decided he was for them, which I think, you can read what you want to in that in terms of how Chelsea go about their business and the type of individuals they want. I mean, they did sign Jadon Sancho last year, which I suppose did speak volumes. So they are prone to taking on a bit of a troublemaker at Manchester United, and Garnacho has certainly had form for that, not quite to the extent that Sancho has. But when there's just one buyer, it's always going to take a hell of a lot of time, and I think if anything, it was very, very predictable that Garnacho is still at the club. With as we approach the final week of the transfer window, it's such common knowledge that United want rid of him. And I mean, I did a piece earlier in the week. United literally have not sold anyone yet this summer, which is, however way you look at it, on that front, that is a failing. When the team finished 15th last season and didn't win a trophy and lost to Tottenham Hotspur in a cup final, it is a massive failing that they've not actually sold a player. And we're not surprised by that because traditionally they have been bad at selling players. They were a lot better last year. They negotiated a fee north of £100 million combined for all the outgoings. But at that time, they had just won an FA Cup final. They had just about qualified for Europe. There were some there were some sellable assets there, players who had a year left in their contracts and had quite an integral role in that FA Cup triumph. Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Scott McTominay both started in that game. McTominay had his best season yet, so there was always going to be a club in for him. He wasn't as good as, and is still not as good as people make out. He had a phenomenal season with Napoli, but we know how weak the Italian league is. That the only Premier League club that wanted him were Fulham, who are quite middle of the road, mid-table, don't really harm many clubs so bad last season in a way that they actually lost twice to United in the Premier League, which they were the only club to do that. So maybe they'll get their exercise some revenge on Sunday. But those two players, just taking as examples, were very different to the players that are in the shop window at the moment at United, because of the season that United have just had, and also the stock of those players. Like Anthony, if United had signed him for 60 million euros and his career had gone the way it has done at United, like his first season, then thereafter a disaster, they would have sold him by now, because they wouldn't have had to command such a big fee for him. And that was always going to be the stumbling block. And that's why I can still see it being a loan deal for him, or a season-long loan with an obligation to buy. They really need a fee for Sancho. And Sancho, it feels like he's being very, very picky, but it is getting to the point now where you look at him and you think, is he an influencer? Is he a footballer? Like, I don't think he is particularly serious about being a footballer anymore. But certainly,
I don't know who he's influencing. He's not a very good influencer if he is one.
Well, yeah, maybe FIFA gamers. Maybe his rating on FIFA is still intact.
I don't think his rating would be very good.
On that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been so long now since I played FIFA. I had a good. It had been probably a 20-year stretch of buying each one every year, and then something changes in your life that everyone can guess, and you literally never play a games console or a game ever again. So I'm completely oblivious as to how FIFA has changed. I would be, I suppose, slightly curious to see how it's gone now. There was something at this Guinness Brewery event we went to on the pre-season tour, where there was, I think it was a PlayStation 5 that was there and available if you wanted to have a game, but I certainly wasn't going to do that, especially when on work. I wasn't going to embarrass myself. But going back to Sancho, how humiliating has it been for him the past couple of years? But I'd say the 4 years he's been at United, he took a leave of absence for a very brief period in his first season. It was a family bereavement, so you have some understanding there. And when he came back from that tragedy in his personal life, he actually played very well the second season. I think in retrospect, taking 3 months out, albeit a period that coincided with the World Cup, so he didn't miss as much as he would have done if it was a normal football calendar. But it's still a hell of a lot of time to take out for physical issues, and I think mental issues as well on that. So you have to have some understanding, but then I think any sympathy, it does go out the window when you come out and accuse your manager of lying over you not being in the squad for a game due to training form, when, let's face it, he had form for being a bad trainer. It was very quick. I remember being on that train coming back from Euston, sat next to Rich Fay, and his statement dropped. And I was just saying to Rich at the time, I remember writing a story about his training form stopping him from getting much playing time during the Euros. I think we're braced for quite a hectic 9 days, isn't it? It's going to be 9 or 10 days, sorry, because there are going to be outgoings. The chances are there will be an incoming or two still, particularly with the state the midfield is in. And we've seen it before. Results can dictate transfer strategy, or they can force things to happen late on in a transfer window. It happened a couple of years ago with Casemiro and Anthony. I mean, I was quite amused to see United's Twitter account celebrating 3 years of Casemiro, and I was thinking it's probably at least a year too many of Casemiro, and it's going to be another year for certain, which is another failing of United, that they negotiated as long a contract as they did with him. And I'm not denigrating Casemiro as a player. He's been a great player, and that first season he was brilliant for United. He was my player of the year, but after that it's been a very gradual climb, although it did pick up a little bit last year. But nevertheless, that midfield area is a concern, and I just hope for United's sake, where they have got in ship shape to an extent this summer on the transfer front, and how aggressive and bullish they've been with reinforcing that attack, and how much they've committed to and invested in it as well. But there's still time for things to take a turn for the worse, and it will be interesting to see if they have a bad result at Fulham on Sunday, it'll be interesting to see how they react to that.
We were at Leigh Sports Village together, Samuel, in March 2022 when Dortmund's under-19s played United's under-19s. And if you remember, Jamie Gittens, I think he was 16 years old. He scored a brace that night. It was fantastic. Sancho had just signed from Dortmund and was obviously playing in his first season at United. And Gittens was a 16-year-old playing at Leigh Sports Village. And I just thought that comparison was quite interesting because this summer, Gittens has just signed for Chelsea, the club who turned down the chance to sign Sancho. And it just really highlights how much Sancho has regressed. He was so far ahead of Gittens in 2022 in terms of their developments and their respective journeys. And yet Gittens has kind of surpassed him now. And it'll be interesting to see how he gets on at Chelsea. It said a lot about Sancho, really, that I think it was the wage demands, wasn't it, that made his deal with Chelsea break down. And obviously then they felt it was necessary to pay $5 million to break their obligation to sign him. There has been some interest from Roma. I think that might not materialise because of his wage demands as well. And it begs the question, really, what is Jadon Sancho expecting? He's shown little to nothing, really, in the last couple of years. He's not the player that we saw develop at Dortmund. If he's going into negotiations and asking for a huge wage packet, he probably needs a bit of a reality check, doesn't he? I have said a few times, the situation is a bit sad for me because he was such a fantastic young talent. And I think we all thought he could really scale really high heights, but it hasn't happened, unfortunately. And as you just said, ultimately, he's only got himself to blame. We'll move on then, because Harry Maguire was speaking at Stretford High School on Wednesday. He briefly touched on his contract situation. He spoke to a few members of the pack. He kind of said, look, I'm in the final year of my contract now. United have said this summer that no clubs coming in from would be kind of listened to. He was not going to leave this year, but that he would revisit the situation and talk to the club ahead of the January transfer window. Because, of course, if you're in the final year of your contract, you can negotiate a free transfer from the start of January. It's an interesting one, Samuel, because he's 32. He celebrates his 33rd birthday in March, I believe. Obviously, the one-year extension was triggered in his contract last season in January. I guess it's just a case of sitting and waiting to see how Maguire performs, what his role is in the next few months. But I would probably be in favour of giving him a new deal, probably a one-year extension, maybe with an option included. What's your take on the situation?
It's far too early to say. It's United will play that by ear. They'll be under no pressure to get anything boxed off at the moment. And he didn't start last week either. Amorim is pretty adamant now that it's either him or De Ligt who play in the middle of the back three unless there's another injury crisis in defence. I don't think Maguire's going to be on the right or the left. I think that sometimes that whole positional thing is so overblown and so overwrought by some outlets when Harry Maguire playing the back three in a run to a World Cup semi-finals for England. And yes, you can play out your skin in a major tournament and it can be misleading, but I don't think Harry Maguire's form in Russia back in 2018 was misleading. Okay, he's had some very bad seasons since then with United, but overall you'd probably say that he's been one of the better signings that they've made of the post-Ferguson or the post-Ronaldo era, because as I've said before, it's not just a post-Ferguson thing. The club were buying quite badly a few years before that, and he is a squad player for the moment. I thought his season last season on a personal basis was possibly his best for United. Obviously, it was a disaster for United, but for Maguire's performance level, some of the performances he put in and the big goals that he scored as well, it was, for me, I think it was his best season. When I asked him about that, he said he felt it was, and I know he said quite recently to Rio Ferdinand about how well organised they were under Solskjaer, McKenna and Carrick. Some people are still wistful about that, and you have to remind them that it was fake football. It was football played in stadiums that were completely empty. It was playing training ground matches, and it really reflected quite badly on United that they adapted to that well, because then look what happened when the playing field was levelled with fans coming back in, and all of a sudden they didn't look so good, and the manager was sacked 3.5 months into that season. And that would be my counterpoint to Maguire, but I can understand from his perspective because United were quite a good defensive unit that season, and he took that form into the Euros where he was injured at the start of it, and then he ended it as probably the best centre back at that tournament. He was he was imperious. At that point, I think it was quite fair to say that he was a world class defender on form, and the year that he'd had in general. And it's to his enormous credit that he's recovered from almost being shipped out to West Ham United, and the deal didn't materialise because of United couldn't pay him off, and he's had two of his best seasons in his career. Quite frankly, I think that the final Ten Hag season, full Ten Hag season, and last season, there is an argument that those two seasons were his best seasons for United, because of course the first two, a lot of the football was played without supporters present, and it was utterly misleading. So you only have to go on the pre-season tour and listen to the cheers he gets now compared to 2 years ago, when you had that very clownish contingent of fans in Dublin booing him just because he made an error against Athletic Bilbao in a friendly. And what happened at the end of that game? He goes up top with United 1-0 down. He wins the header and gets the assist for Facundo Pellistri's equaliser. So Maguire has become a real proper example at United, and he's become a captain without the armband. And I was extremely critical of him 2 or 3 years ago, and he deserved it at the time. And in the last 2 years, I've extolled him to high heaven. He deserves it. He's a really good talker now. He's a much more authentic talker. He's more relaxed. He's good with the media. There was an amusing. It's not exactly a Peter Ustinov anecdote, but when I was in Chicago, we'd gone out for dinner one night, and I had to. There was a CVS over the road, which is the pharmacy, and we had a flight the next day, and I fancied getting. This was how childlike I was. I literally went in there and got some M&Ms and some Coke. It wasn't going in for a beer. It wasn't going in for a bottle of wine. It was nothing. It was none of those vices. My vice was chocolate and a fizzy drink. And I was walking back to my hotel, and in the distance that I was getting close to, I suddenly saw this figure, white T-shirt, quite tall, very familiar haircut. And I was getting nearer, and the nearer I got, I realised, oh, that's Harry Maguire. And this was at about 20 to 11, so it really wasn't late, and it wasn't players out on the lash or anything like that. I need to be very, need to declare that from the outset. And I noticed that he was joined by Bruno Fernandez and Luke Shaw, and they were just going for a stroll around Chicago, one of the best cities in America, one of the best cities in the world, possibly. No hassle whatsoever. And this was during that, is it Lollapalooza, the festival? So the place was buzzing. So it wasn't like it was a quiet night in Chicago either. And I was getting close to them. I thought, oh, Christ, this is a bit awkward. I'm going to have to make a turn here or something just to avoid them. And then I heard a whistle, and someone jogged past me, and it was Rasmus Højlund. And he said something to them, his other three teammates. And all of a sudden, I realised that Maguire was breaking off from them and getting slower and slower and slower. And I thought, oh, no, come on. And then he turned around, looked at me, and he recognised me because I've interviewed him. I've spoken to him a bunch of times. And he said, all right, mate. And I just went, all right, mate. And that was it. That was literally the sum of it, which is such a male thing to do. In retrospect, I thought, Christ, it's a good thing I was here, not Steven Railston, because they'd still be talking. I don't think Harry Maguire would even have got home from Chicago at that point. But that's how sound he is. But I thought, like, reading between the lines, it was also like Højlund, and I know, we're not being arrogant here, but there are players who know who certain journalists are. But Højlund did dedicate an Instagram post to me practically at the end of his first season. And reading between the lines, it was almost like he's gone and listen, like, there's that fucker, Samuel Luckhurst, or there's a journalist behind
Beep.
us. And Maguire just completely disarmed the there wasn't a situation, but he just disarmed. He disarmed me. It was just, I wasn't going to have any chit chat with him. I felt quite embarrassed. I thought, here I am clutching a Coke and a bag of M&Ms, and he's just out for an evening stroll. Bruno Fernandez and Luke Shaw did not break stride whatsoever. I mean, I've interviewed both of them, but it's not like, oh, they're going to stop and shake hands or anything. You might get that with one or two players at United, but I certainly wasn't expecting it from them. And they then turned left. I went straight ahead because my hotel was literally 5 minutes away from theirs, and pretty much another block away or a couple of blocks away. And they went back to their hotel and more than comfortably met the midnight curfew that United had given them.
I feel like that story has meme potential. The all right, mate. The way it was delivered.
If I could embellish it for the after dinner circuit in about 20 years' time, just make up some nonsense, couldn't I? Yeah.
Well, I'll add a very insignificant story. When I was leaving the Fiorentina friendly a week and a half ago, Bruno Fernandez's wife cut us off with him in the car leaving the stadium. Looked over and realised it was him looking out the window. But again, an irrelevant story that no one cares about. Moving on then, Samuel, let's talk about a bit more news. United are set to appoint Stephen Torpi from Brentford. I reported last month, I was told Torpi was the man and he was being considered to succeed Nick Cox, who's obviously been fantastic at the club over the last 9 years. He's going to leave a fantastic legacy behind. Youth Cup in 2022, debuts for Alejandro Garnacho, Kobbie Mainoo, top youth signings, played a big role in Chidiobi. So it's a big role for Torpi to fill into. If you look at his record, it does seem a promising appointment. He had a modest playing career, actually played for FC United, one of the first players to play for them. Then he went into coaching with Liverpool, worked with Rafa Benitez, went to Manchester City. So again, another Manchester City appointment that is Wilcox driven. Worked his way up, joined them in 2014, became head of coaching in 2020 for under 15s to under 23. This is all very kind of youth kind of lingo, I guess. But the point is he has a very good record in youth development. He played a role in the development of Cole Palmer, James McAtee, Rico Lewis, and he's basically been hired at Brentford to to build their academy from scratch to category 1 academy status. So like I say, on paper it looks a good appointment. You got anything to add, Samuel? I know really we haven't had a chance obviously to speak to Torpi yet. That'll be interesting going forward. It seems obviously a very Jason Wilcox appointment. That is who is overseeing this.
I've obviously I've been on for a couple of days. I did see the news. I mean, you're absolutely the expert on this, and I'm glad you've gone through all of that, because I did have a message from a friend yesterday saying that this guy did play for FC United and apparently he's a Scouser. So those were pretty much the only two things I was aware of. But as you've just outlined there, that is really good pedigree. You need that for an academy head. And Nick Cox quietly worked in the background before he assumed that role at United, but he had been in the building for a while, and what he has overseen and what United have achieved during that period, again, as you've pretty much outlined in terms of winning the Youth Cup, debutants, players who've left for decent money, and other players who are coming through, and the potential and the state of the academy. At the moment, he has done an impeccable job. It's never a perfect job. I don't think it ever can be a perfect job. You look at Garnacho and his attitude, and I think the academy are extremely quick to pat themselves on the back at times, and the times when they'll go quiet when there is an issue with an academy player or two. And look, they can't be responsible for how a player is going to conduct himself when he's an adult, and Garnacho is 21. But there have been, let's put it politely, and I think it's putting it mildly as well, there have been issues with certain academy players in recent years at United, some extremely serious, some more frivolous. And I think certainly a couple of years ago, they should have taken stock of that and drawn a line and handled the Mason Greenwood situation, which was obviously not just it was not an academy decision, that was a club decision. But as a club, they really needed to turn the page there and make a statement. And there was a very easy way of going about it, but they made it difficult for themselves because they took the unprincipled decision they intended to reintegrate him back into the squad, which I thought was a mistake. And when you do something like that, you look at the damage that it caused. I think there was a lot of strife at the club as well, and a bit of turmoil. And I do think that seeped into the fraught atmosphere that developed at the start of that season, and then it just continued and continued and continued. And there was not a month that went without a crisis at United in the 23-24 season, and it did pretty much stem, although there were other issues as well, but that decision and the way it was handled was appalling. And this was someone who they'd brought through their academy, which I think made it was even closer to home in that sense. So it's not perfect, but the Manchester United academy should always be seen as the best in class for what they do. And I think they, in that sense, they have returned to that level in the past 6 years, isn't it, that Nick Cox has been there. And in that role, Nicky Butt, I thought, laid down a hell of a lot of good groundwork for him. And he's probably someone that was underused after that role as well, when I think he could have been kept on in a different role. I'm not saying there should have been an old boys club function going on. I was very critical of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer doing that with his coaching staff and some of the appointments that he made. But I thought Butt I think he's one of the unsung heroes of the rejuvenation of the academy, because it has been a 10-year thing. I remember 10 years ago there being uproar in Northern Ireland that United weren't going to compete in the Milk Cup, which of course was a competition that they still compete in now. And historically, David Beckham had gone there and won it. And the class of '92 had played there, and it was seen as a real, as I said, with a country like Northern Ireland, which has such a strong affinity to Manchester United, for the youth team not to be turning up in their prestigious youth tournament, it did create news over there. And the academy was in such a state of flux back then. So it was dreadful how it was neglected. And it was only when Nicky Butt came in at the start of 2016 that they started to get their house in order again. They started to make strides. And Nick Cox has overseen some phenomenal work. And you just hope that it continues, because it's like the job there is never ever complete. You are always looking to service the first team, produce players for the first team, and there is that duty of care that they have, in that they really do try and look after players who are not going to make it at United, and the majority won't. That's just the way it goes. That is the reality of it. But you go back to the pandemic and allowing players who had technically been released, but they were allowed to still come in at Carrington and train there, use the facilities and try and keep themselves in shape ahead of getting a new club. And however, I'm sure there are people at the academy who derive as much joy from seeing someone like, plucking the name out of thin air here, Dimitri Mitchell at Exeter, as they have done at seeing Angel Gomez play for Marseille, and he'll be playing in the Champions League this season, or Kobbie Mainoo scoring an FA Cup final winner. That is the camaraderie they build and want to develop, and hopefully it continues. And it's just enjoyable to cover the academy. If it was a standalone job, I think I'd want to do it over the first team, because you tend to get pretty good access. Although the goalposts have changed with United in recent years, where they don't and haven't had a dedicated press officer overseeing the academy for quite some time. But it is enjoyable, and you do feel a bit of an affinity with a player if you see him before anyone else has, pretty much. And then they go on and score on their debut, or they make their debut and you're present for it. And that was kind of how I felt with Marcus Rashford, that I saw him score his only goal for the under-21s at Lee, and then I was, madly enough, I was the only MEN writer in attendance for the Midland game when he was parachuted into the lineup at the 11th hour because Anthony Marshall tweaked his hamstring. But it was extremely fulfilling. And then you're on the phone the next day to his old coach or chairman at Fletcher Moss. It's like, oh yeah, he rejected Liverpool, he rejected Manchester City, and think that's my day taken care of. That's a great enough line for me. Thank you very much. So that you do actually derive some joy. There is a pureness about academy football and youth level, and hopefully, although it has changed a hell of a lot, and the egos do seem to swell a little bit more every year, hopefully that pureness of it does remain.
Yeah, I feel very similar towards Kobbie Mainoo after watching him come through, driving around the country in some cold winter nights. I think I remember driving up to Fleetwood in maybe October 2022 to watch Mainoo in other games when he was playing for the under-21s at 18 years old, and you could tell he was such a talent. It's been such a pleasure to kind of watch him develop, and I was the first to track down his coaches. As you said, you spoke to Rashford's coaches. They're always really uplifting pieces to write. Just quickly on Torpi, I mean, I think it's more of an interesting appointment in the sense, I think he does a lot of work on grass, from what I can tell. I've been doing some reading. He was kind of credited with helping City implement like a Barcelona style in their academy to reflect the way Guardiola was playing. Nick Cox's responsibilities have been more of an organiser, so he has not been on the pitch doing the coaching. So whether that's going to change going forward will be really fascinating. But again, I guess when we get a chance to sit down with Torpi, we'll be able to get those answers and put those questions to him. Moving on then, Samuel, it's Fulham on Sunday. We're both heading down to the game at Craven Cottage. I think we were both in agreement about the selection choices Ruben Amorim made last weekend. Obviously, huge positives to take from that performance, albeit United lost. How many changes would you make? I'm thinking Ahmad in, Onana in, and Sesko in for myself.
I would agree with that. From what I was told, I think he's leaning towards recalling Onana, which is not. It's not breaking news. It's not a story that merits the alarm emoji on Twitter. Although I'm not too sure many stories merit that kind of attention. But that has to happen. I mean, I think if he was to keep buying deer, then probably need in that new treatment room at Carrington. They'd probably like, Ruben, can you come down here, please? We need to examine your head after keeping Altay in for a second game. That's such an obvious decision that he has to make, and you just hope for the United sake that they can get the positives from that Arsenal defeat are not lost, because if they were to lose to Fulham, it would be, I think, the reaction would be very different, because it would be 2 successive defeats, and I can't imagine. I think it would be a surprise if United were to play as well as they did against Arsenal at Fulham and lose. That would be a real kick in the teeth, and if anything, that would be a cause for concern. But he can't. I was saying last week, because we knew Casemiro was going to start, but I was like, he cannot start Casemiro. He can't. It's just for the principle of it. I knew he was going to, but it does feel rather defeatist when you make those calls. And now that I mention that, I would, as bad as he was, and at that time of the game, when you are trying to hone your piece, sometimes you can overlook certain things. But cracky, Ugarte really was. He was badder than bad, wasn't he? In that cameo, and his confidence is shot. And I think it's safe to assume that he will not be starting on Sunday. But I'm also inclined to just put him in, because you need to try and make it work somehow or other, because there's not a guarantee they'll get a midfielder in. You do not want to be starting Casemiro in the majority of Premier League games. You really do not want to be doing that.
And having said that,
United are going to get far with that.
I completely agree. And yet, when obviously we have to submit our preferred team for the panel piece ahead of the weekend, and I've actually put Casemiro in my midfield alongside Fernandez. The logic thinking, if I'm putting Ahmad in at right wing back, I'm going to need a more defensive option in midfield. And I get the logic with Ugarte. You're right. If it's going to work, you have to play him and try give him that confidence. Try and make his performance level increase. Samuel's suffering the perils of doing a remote podcast there with a little visitor in the background. But would you prefer Ugarte to come in then, Samuel, on Sunday? Do you think that's the best choice?
Yes. My gut instinct would be, yeah. It's not even a Rich Fay selection, where sometimes he would do something mad
like
with
do a left
those
field.
panel teams. Yeah. It's just it's the principle of it. I think it's like a bit like the principle of saying that I was always adamant that you need a proven striker. It's got to be someone who has been around the block, has done it, which is why I didn't. I still, at this time of speaking, I still don't think that Sesko was the right man for United to bring in. It may work out for him, it may not, but I didn't. My conviction is still that they needed someone who had been around the block, who was older, and look, it wasn't that pool was not exactly deep in the summer, but that's just an example of just sticking to the conviction of your opinion, really, and that would be why I would still be inclined to go with Ugarte, even though his confidence does look shot. I was encouraged by how well he played against West Ham in pre-season, but that tour ended well for him. Then it ended very badly for him, because he was really poor against Everton, and it did almost feel like in that West Ham game as well that West Ham looked quite undercooked, and Everton seemed a bit more robust and a bit fitter, which I wasn't surprised by, because David Moyes does have that tendency to really try and make players run, and he's big on fitness. I know every coach is big on fitness, but Moyes' reputation does precede him a little bit more in that sense.
Should we talk about Kobbie Mainoo briefly then? I know I kind of touched on there from an academy perspective, but there's been a conversation around him this week. He was obviously an unused substitute against Arsenal. Ugarte was chosen to come on to replace Casemiro. Amram seemed to suggest when he discussed Mainoo across the summer that it would be Mainoo for the role that Fernandez plays in the pivot, in the deeper midfield roles, and then kind of Casemiro and Ugarte would be battling for the other role. Is that logical in your mind, or would you like to say, do you think Mainoo could partner Fernandez in some games? I think he could, personally. I would go with Casemiro at the weekend, though, because as I said on the podcast on Monday, for all he started the game slowly and I thought he was a bit of a passenger, I actually think he improved as the match went on.
Yeah, I was just messaging a loved one to inform them of our little guest who very charmingly came in earlier. The thing with Mainoo is that they need to sort out his contract still. And I get that when a player is on the bench and he's not a starter, the chances of that happening reduce, because what's the incentive at that point? And that may be the case for Harry Maguire if in 6 or 7 months' time his position is unchanged, really, that Matias is still ahead of him. But we all know things can change a hell of a lot. I don't think last week Mainoo not coming on was that much of an issue. I thought at the time when Casemiro and Mount came off, they were the right two to come off, and the right two came on. You need balance. You can't just go gung-ho. If they had Fernandez and Mainoo in midfield, you expect that. That's what they did pretty much at the end of the Lyon game, didn't they? It was, we've got to go hell for leather here because we're 4-2 down and we're going out of Europe and our season's about to blow up in our face, so we just need to chuck the kitchen sink and literally every other utensil to try and salvage the situation. They did salvage it. So it wouldn't have made sense to do that last week. Maguire clearly came on because I think there was a managing of minutes in defence, and you do see that from time to time. And also Amram is thinking he could be useful if we need to go with an aerial threat towards the end of the game, which sometimes you can turn. I think there are times when you turn your nose up at it. There are times when you completely understand it. Leon completely understand it. I suppose we understood it at the end of the Europa League final as well, but it didn't look good. They were doing that with £108.5 million worth of strikers in their squad that evening, and of course they still fired blanks in that one as well. But I didn't really have a problem with Mainoo not having a role in the game last week. But Amram has got to make that work, and he does want to make it work. As I said, what he said about Mainoo on tour was more what he said than what you saw from Mainoo. Amram clearly rates him. There's almost I suppose there's a slight comparison to, and I'm not saying you're going to get the same results at all whatsoever, but what Slot did with Gravenberch. Where Gravenberch almost felt like a bit of an afterthought at Liverpool under Klopp. And he was signed quite late in that window, and you didn't necessarily feel as though he was completely culturally aligned with Liverpool, what a Liverpool midfielder looks like under Klopp. And also, was he maybe a little bit tarred by the Ajax brush, where you'd seen so many players who were schooled at Ajax go to Manchester United, and then the majority of them not look very good whatsoever. And of course, Gravenberch didn't do much that season. Slot tweaked something, and then Gravenberch, he was in the PFA team of the year, wasn't he, I think? And you'd probably say deservedly so on that, because he was pivotal for them in that role that you like to refer to as the pivot. And with Mainoo, you just wonder whether Amram can make those tweaks where it does have that impact. The difference with Mainoo is that he had a brilliant season, or a brilliant 6 months, wasn't it, when he came in November, that Goodson game back in 2023. He has cut it in the Premier League, and also he's a fair bit younger than Gravenberch. So many players have had difficult second seasons at Manchester United, at other big clubs in England. He had a lot of injury issues last season as well, which you have to factor in. Change of coach. We've been through all this context before. I don't think it's anything to worry about. But there's got to be progress made this season. Otherwise, I think that chances are that you'll be looking at Kobbie Mainoo possibly leaving Manchester United next year. If there's no progress and he remains in this stagnant spot, then I don't see what incentive or what United can do but to entertain the prospect of selling him next year, because the contract situation, as long as with that rumbling on in the background, there's every chance come January, will Chelsea go poking around again, see, will they test the waters, will they see what's happening? But I hope come January that Mainoo's had a fulfilling 4 or 5 months playing for United.
Yeah, it's definitely not time to panic about Mainoo after the first game of the season. But if we get around to November time and he's not got a settled role in the team, and as you said, we've not seen progress, then yeah, maybe the red flags will be raised, and maybe he will be, unfortunately, on his way out. But we'll have to see how the situation unfolds. Hopefully that is not the case. We'll leave it there then, Samuel. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Stephen.
And thanks to listeners as always. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the game on Sunday. We'll be back to reflect on the performance and give our thoughts. Take care.